Okay, very good. Thanks very much, Larry, for the introduction to the competition. So I just have a very brief introduction to Scott. So, I know that Scott was a member, all of 2016. I mean, very religiously showing up for the competitions and the programs. And it was a real joy to be around him. And then all of a sudden, he stopped coming early in 2017. And it's like, what the heck is going on? And then later kind of found out that life kind of threw a spanner in Scott's, in his works. And so it was, I think that's what this presentation's about, is kind of like what happened, what did he do to, to adapt to the situation. And with that, Scott, I'll let you take it over and, and just tell your story, show some of your wonderful photographs.
No, thank you. So as Dave says, this is just one massive apology for abandoning you all in 2017. So I was a member, moved here in 2015. And one of the first things I wanted to do when I came to Colorado was join a club. And I felt very much at home in the Focus Camera Club, particularly when it was in Greenwood Village, because that's where I live. But more importantly, made some wonderful friends. And it's great to see a few of you on screen this evening. I'm going to embarrass people like Kevin and Cliff and Russ Burden later. So I'm not going to say too much about them just now. So I'm just going to fire and share my screen. But I do want to thank you, Dave, for sort of setting this up and getting me back involved, and it was great to see you a few months ago. So, as I say, I don't mind if people want to ask questions or use chat. Once the screen's up, I won't be able to see your faces, so it's kind of very hard to gauge body language and reactions and things. So, Rand, Kevin, if things need sped up or whatever, just feel free to send me a chat or anything like that, and I'll speed up. So, I would plan to speak for about an hour, if that sounds about right. So kicking off, if this will go to full screen. Okay. So hopefully you can all see that. That is a coastal scene from northern Spain, an area called Barrica, which I call Chasing the Dragon. And it's one of my favorite places in the world. In fact, if I ever get torn away from Colorado, that's likely to be the place that my wife and I will retire, and more of her on the next slide. My handle, if you like, is Wilson Axby, and I think it's probably just worth explaining why that's the case. So my wife, who's top right there, is from the Basque country in northern Spain, and that's the flag in the bottom left there. As you can probably tell, I'm from Scotland. Some might think Ireland, but it's definitely Scotland. And if you type Scott Wilson, which is my name, into Google, I might come up on page 95 if I'm lucky. But Wilson Axby, that's my wife's surname and my surname together, is a completely unique name. So if you type that into Google, I will come up first as the only one in the world, apart now from my children. So it seemed quite a useful search handle for me as a photographer, albeit I've now discovered that no one can pronounce it. So that's just something I need to get used to. So I wanted to introduce this a little bit. This is my sort of like the inside cover, if you like, of my website. And that introduces the sort of landscape, skiscapes, nature, travel and eclectic portfolio that I try and offer through the website. I did this presentation, or a variation of it, fairly recently at a high school in Denver. And the photography tutor there asked me to sort of say a few words. And I wanted to talk about the values and things like that that would really kind of motivate the kids. So I talked about the adventure that I felt as a photographer, the sense of professionalism to get better, and the real feeling of growth as you move through the years and join clubs, etc. The adaptability that we'll come on to with my disease. And I kind of said, is that the sort of values that you're looking to inspire in the children? And he turned to me and said, well, that kind of sounds good, but I really just like it if you could persuade them to get their coursework in on time. And that's when I realized that we were trying to pitch this at completely different levels, but I know this is a vastly different audience today, so I'm happy to talk about the deeper meaning of photography. This kind of takes me back to where I began, which was in just outside Glasgow in Scotland. My wife and I had moved to the countryside. She'd basically moved into my one-bedroom bachelor flat in Glasgow and said this was not sufficient for a couple. So we found a bit more space in the countryside. And of course, I'm in our home washing the dishes one evening, and I look out the window and I see these 4 eyes looking back at me, and it was a deer and a baby deer. And I appreciate that means nothing to a Coloradan. It's like, you know, we obviously see thousands of them all the time. But to me, this was this wonderful moment of connection with nature. And I turned to my wife and like, where's my camera? And she's like, don't be stupid. You don't have a camera. And I think that's the moment I really realized that I wanted to fulfill this space in my life to start taking pictures. This is clearly not the picture that I took that day. I wouldn't have the capability, never mind the kit, at that point. This is a stag that I shot a few years later, but it does kind of conjure that memory for me. And you know, having that kind of desire to grow, I did start to seek out a club very, very quickly. That was a picture of my first camera there, which was a Nikon F65. So it was the kind of latter end of the film days at that point. So I didn't really get into much of the kind of knowledge and professionalism around film. It was where I started. But I'd say my expertise, if you like, is far more digitally focused. But we had moved to Nottingham in England by this point. I was in the brewing business, and there was a major brewery in the middle of England. And moved to Nottingham. And one thing you realise in Nottingham, because of the Robin Hood connection, every single club in Nottingham, no matter what genre it is, it's called Nottingham Outlaws. So you've got Nottingham Outlaws Basketball Society, Football Club, and of course, Photographic Society. So I willingly threw myself into that club to learn, and just found again a wonderful environment, the same as I did when I moved here, with sort of like-minded people. And I think it's just a great place to not just socialize, but really learn, find out what genres you're interested in, and throw yourself into it. Of course, you do kind of arrive thinking, yeah, I already know what I'm doing and I can take pictures. And as you have all experienced, apart from the guy that gives out 10 for every single image, there is a kind of withering scrutiny that can go with some judging criteria sometime. And I remember throwing in these early images and learning very, very quickly about what was wrong with an image. And usually I test people on this if it's a face-to-face presentation, but I'll just do it myself. So clearly top left, you know, there's some nice kind of earthy morning glow there, but the sky is completely burnt out. So that got a 3 out of 10 equivalent. You know, in the middle at the bottom there is a picture of a favourite building in Glasgow in Scotland, but the converging verticals would opt that out of any kind of winning shot. Top right was a seascape scene in northern Spain. Again, I was very proud. I've converted it black and white, but the horizon is off. And then bottom right is a cathedral scene in Salamanca in Spain. Again, I was so impressed with my work on creating impact and contrast. And the first thing the judge says is, I can't see any detail in the shadows whatsoever. So you do start to sort of just pick up and learn very, very quickly. And clearly I'm preaching to the converted. You're already in a club. But when I talk to people outside of clubs, I'm a strong recommender of joining a club and throwing yourself into that environment and just seeing it as a learning experience as you grow. And once you do grow, you start to get a better appreciation of light and shadow and interplay and bringing detail out of shadows and making sure that things are positioned correctly. This was actually a very opportunistic shot by me. That chair was not in that position at all. It was way off camera to the right. And so I guess visualizing the image that you want to take and not necessarily just capturing what's in front of your eyes is one of the things that I would try and impart here. So I very deliberately positioned the chair to take advantage of the light, etc. I managed to get into the church before it was opened by befriending the lady that owned the keys to the church, kind of thing. So really foreseeing what you're trying to take. And I had basically planned this image sort of 24 hours in advance. This was a church in Mortimer, which is in the middle of France. And then trying different genres. So I love sports photography and wildlife and action, and just catching things at speed is a real attraction for me. We're in kind of the verge of hummingbird season right now in Colorado. I mean, and I know personally how difficult it is to catch a hummingbird, but trust me, a puffin in flight, especially with sand eels, is really the holy grail when it comes to catching a fast bird in flight. So I was absolutely delighted to get that. This was 1/5000th of a second. and there's still blur in his back wing. So it just gives you a sense of how fast these things are moving. They really are like bullets. And then at the other end of the scale, this is panning at about 100th of a second. And again, so you're just constantly sort of panning as these bikes go past. He's probably doing about 90 to 100 miles an hour. He's on a bend, and you're just basically trying to pan to give you that wonderful motion blur in the background and freeze the rider. So again, I was very sort of proud of that. It was a different genre, a different way of panning completely from the puffin. And then you try and look at things, you're creating more mood and drama. So I started to look at black and white. As a traditional landscaper, my normal hours of work, if you like, are very much pre-dawn and dusk in the evening. The one on the left, though, is actually shot bang in the middle of the day. So I've used a circular polarizer to bring out some of the darkness in the sky and really dramatize the kind of light play on what we call groins. I'm not sure what we call them in the States, but those sticks, if you like, are called groins, certainly in England. And then on the right there, this was actually a cricket ground in England. We had a very rare flood after torrential rain. And I was just kind of driving around looking for interesting scenes and came upon this cricket ground, which was just covered in water, which is clearly an unusual scene. That bench, however, was nowhere to be seen. That was way over in the white building at the back there. So again, it's about visualizing how that scene could come to life. And I dragged the bench, if you like, back over here to give me some strong foreground. It's a wide angle shot, so it's probably not as far as that looks. And it's probably, I think, about a minute exposure to give that complete sheen, if you like, on the water and that sense of motion in the sky. So again, experimenting in different genres. And as you start to gain confidence, I would reach out to magazines and newspapers and start saying, I've got a portfolio, I'd like to share that. And you start to get some traction. So that top left is another panning shot. That's 1/50th of a second, I think it was. 3 racehorses in England. So that was one of my first published works. And then there's street scene bottom left, portraiture bottom right. The one in the top right actually won a sports photography award. And again, there isn't actually sports action there, but the judge viewed this as just a great way of capturing sporting moments in terms of the fan and that fan moment. So again, just thinking a little bit kind of out of the box when you approach some of these things could help as well. I didn't have a massive sports portfolio and yet still managed to sort of break through there with something that was a little bit different. And in terms of being a little bit different, I've always tried to kind of, I suppose, break the mold or look at different options. And as a committed seascaper, I had this set of Lee filters, if you like, and I was living in Nottingham, which is a bit like Colorado in the sense that it's very, very landlocked. You're about as far from the coast as you could possibly be. And I had a flash gun, which I used mostly for portraiture, but not much work really. And I was kind of wondering, what would happen if I put these things together? Would I create any sort of sense of drama? And that's when I came upon a genre that I'd like to think I contributed to, which I call dramatic flowerscapes, which is basically just getting down really, really low with a wide angle, kind of looking up at flowers, and then using the graduated filter and a flash gun, just create this really, really dark background and this really stark foreground that just pops in terms of contrast. And in terms of breakthroughs for me as a photographer, that was probably one of my breakthroughs, certainly on social media. And I suddenly found that there was this massive following for these very dramatic flower images. And, you know, you're kind of going from hundreds of views for things to thousands of views for images and getting sort of big followerships on Flickr, etc. So again, back to that thinking differently, that gave me the courage to start putting these forward to magazines and things. And I found I was getting traction as an advisor, if you like, on how to create drama in these little flower scenes. So that was some nice pieces of early coverage there. And every year in the UK, we have a competition called the Landscape Photographer of the Year. It's very well established now. I think it's in its 12th or 13th year in Britain. They've opened it up in the United States. I think it might be in its 2nd or 3rd. I might not have the years perfectly right, but approximately. And they had a category called Your View, If you look at the picture on your left, it's not a traditional landscape scene. And again, I didn't have this massive portfolio of traditional landscape scenes, but I suddenly had this portfolio of dramatic flowerscapes. And I put 4 of them forward, and all 4 made it to the semi-final of this competition. And the one that you see here, which I call rojo, which is simply Spanish for red, actually made it into the final and into the book, and even better, made it into a celebration book that they produced after 10 years. So that's really worked very well for me as a genre, and that in particular as an image. That set me off on a bit of a chain, actually, and I managed to reach the final of this competition 4 years in a row, starting with Rojo. Then you've got this seascape scene in the top, which is Hartland Quay, which is an area of North Devon in England, very, very rugged, wild. Reminds me a little bit of the kind of Oregon coast, the Pacific Northwest. Beautiful sunrises, beautiful sunsets, and of course the day I went, there was no light at all. It was flat as a pancake. And being a kind of committed, dramatic light photographer, I was packing up, after sunrise, because there wasn't one, and ready to go home. And I just watched these waves crashing against the rocks. And I just got out a very simple 50mm lens and put it onto my camera and just started shooting action as I was seeing it in front of me. So it was a very different take on what I would normally do. And yet that managed to break through into the final of that competition. Bottom left is Blackrock Cottage in Scotland. It's in Glencoe. And the mountain in the back is called Buachai Etive Moor, which is probably the Scottish equivalent of the Maroon Bells. It's got that kind of stature in Scotland, and it's a very typical scene. But remember, this is probably 10 years ago now, and I had never seen a starlit shot of this cottage at night. So again, booked myself into a hotel, had a few whiskies to help me get to sleep, and kind of staggered up to this scene in the middle of the night. It was completely cloudy. There wasn't really much action there. And then suddenly the clouds just opened, and this star just popped right above the mountain. I had this wonderful moonlight on the cottage. So again, this is a very typical cliche, if you like, in Scotland, but having that different take on it in the middle of the night managed to break through. Of course, now I've seen hundreds of photos of it in the middle of the night. So you need to find your new takes on cliches all the time. And then bottom right is Penman Lighthouse, which is in Wales. So you've got England, Scotland, and Wales in front of you. And this is an isle called Anglesey. And this lighthouse is very famous. Again, there's usually close-up shots of the lighthouse, all very dramatic. For me, this is all about the seaweed in the foreground. So again, thinking about the whole picture. I love the Milky Way, but I don't like seeing pictures just of the Milky Way with no picture around it, no foreground. The Milky Way should be the backdrop. And for me, that was the approach to this lighthouse as well. And it was all about that atmosphere in the foreground. So that actually triggered interest in media as well. And I was very lucky. I got a 10-page feature in Advanced Photographer in the UK just on focusing on my seascapes, which for a landlocked guy living in Nottingham was a real privilege. But I think being landlocked had forced me to really search around all the different coasts in England. And I'll confess, it's a lot easier to do there than it is here. Like even being landlocked, 3 hours and I could be on the coast quite easily. So it's easier than it is in Denver, Colorado. The picture on the right is a picture that was shot of me, not by me, by a friend in northern Spain. And if you ever get a chance to go, the coastline across the kind of Bilbao, Basque Country area is just absolutely stunning. So once COVID lifts and we can all fly to Europe again, I'd thoroughly recommend that area. So in the meantime, if you take that as seascapes, as I say, I was also working in the brewing industry, and it did give me a chance to travel. I was very lucky, and I spent a lot of time either touring our brewery locations or other locations on business. So I did have frequent trips even back then to Denver. So that picture is a kind of Denver sunset. That's shot from Cherry Creek State Park, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. That's not the park. It's like if you climb up the embankment just next to the tower, and then you can look at the city from there. It's a wonderful view And this got the attention of the Denver Broncos and their Instagram page just because the colours matched their kit. So, I mean, suddenly that was getting 30,000, 40,000 hits just because the Denver Broncos had taken advantage of it. Bottom left is Toronto. If you ever get a chance to visit Toronto, I insist that you take the ferry out to Toronto Island. It's only a 20-minute journey, and this is the view that treats you when you get to that island. It's an absolutely stunning city and really, really quite accessible. I don't think that was much more than, I think it was shot with a 24-70 lens. So that shows you how close that city is. And then the right there is Prague. And I was quite lucky business-wise. I was relocated to Prague in 2012, not to live there, but to work there. I would commute backwards and forwards from the UK. This is Charles Bridge, incredibly famous, iconic location. So again, what's my different take on that? And this is a 4-minute exposure just after sunrise in the morning. So we've got all that light coming through the exposure. It's with a 10-stop filter. You've got this wonderful sort of soft motion in the sky. And of course, being a 10-stop filter, over 4 minutes, the people have been obliterated. So that bridge was full of people, but just through the motion, it's managed to make the bridge look vacant, which is obviously an added factor for me. And then again, talking of icons, I think, this is a fairly cliched shot of Big Ben in London. But again, you can do icons well and you can screw them up. And for me, the key is to time it so that the bus going past isn't going past with such a long exposure that you obliterate the Houses of Parliament behind it. So think about the shot you're trying to create. And for me, getting the Houses of Parliament in focus through the bus lines was actually the key to a successful shot there. And then I replicated it. I went to Istanbul and I thought, well, how do I do the same technique somewhere else? And suddenly I got a more unique shot. Everybody in London's done the Big Ben with the bus shot, but I hadn't ever seen one from Istanbul. So that started to give a unique take on an old way of shooting, if you like. This is New York on the East Coast. I am on the Manhattan side looking towards Brooklyn. And this is relatively high tide. It's a place that I would go every year on business. I was always the annoying guy that had 3 cases full of camera gear as my colleagues would do the roll-on, roll-off job, and they all had to wait for me. But when you get a scene like that opening up in front of you, it was always worthwhile. I've got to be honest, it was always a sleeping challenge because you have to get up at 3 in the morning to make these shots work. And then you go back to your hotel, putting on a suit and a tie, going to the stock exchange, making a presentation, meeting investors, and then going back out at night again. So for me, these were just sleepless experiences. And as long as I could get great shots, I was happy to sleep when I went home. The message here is to always return to old scenes because you never know what you might find. This is the exact same scene as the place, or the exact same location, if you like, as the shot before. The tide is low, and yes, there is a grand piano stranded on the beach in Manhattan, which just blew my mind. So you can imagine me showing up bleary-eyed in the middle of the night to just do the night shot and the sunrise, and I'm just greeted by this absolutely stunning piece of foreground prop, if you like, in the form of this decaying grand piano. So I don't think I will ever experience something like that again, but of course I will return to the same scene and see if I can find something different. You mentioned Russ Burden judging in a couple of weeks. He absolutely loved this shot. This was in a competition at Focus in 2016, and Russ was very complimentary about this image. So then I got the invitation to move to Colorado. So imagine I've been traveling the world and got asked again, part of the brewing business, to move to Denver. We did a little bit of a tour of a family. As a family, I've got a wife, 2 children, Andrew and Alba. They were 10 and 14 at the time. And everyone was very excited about the prospect moving here. I was very excited as a photographer, just thinking about the landscape that was on my doorstep. And as a cityscaper as well, this was the view from my office window. So I will not deny there's a lot of privilege attached to that. But this is the 48th floor of the, what's the name of it? I've forgotten the name, the Transamerica building, 1801 California, in downtown Denver. So again, a little bit like the New York story, I would sort of go into work really, really early with all my gear. One of the challenges as a photographer is all the lights are motion censored. So you'd walk through this building, and the thing that will kill an image when you're trying to shoot through a glass window into light outside is light coming on. Lights were popping on all over the place. So you kind of learn, you start to take a blanket, and I felt like an old 1920s photographer kind of hiding under the blanket to keep the light out. But again, just being able to see Denver from that height, it felt like a real privilege. And I was often asked if these were drone shots, but it was just the luck of having that special access. As Dave said, that year I joined Focus Camera Club. I had a great year with the club. As I say, met loads of people, really got stuck into the competitions. And, you know, now I've got a lot of energy back. I'm sure I will get back into that club scene soon, and Focus is certainly a place that I would be happy to get back involved with. So maybe talk about that later. But in the meantime, we were just touring Colorado with a vengeance. It's just such a wonderful city to explore. This is an old pumpkin truck that I found just outside Longmont in Colorado. And again, for me being Scottish, the contradiction that was the winter scene with the autumn scene mixed together was just captivating. Of course, I now realise that as a Coloradan, you just expect to get snow in the middle of the summer. You know, you can get it any time you like. But for me, this was a kind of unique scene. This image is now up in Denver Airport as part of a series celebrating Colorado images. I think that's up there for 2 years at the moment. This is a scene outside Crested Butte in Colorado. I call this Moonlight Shadow. Again, middle of the night, you cannot see a thing. It's pitch black. So this is all about long exposure. I've used a flashlight to kind of softly illuminate the side of the building. And then the moon has done the rest of the work. And again, the building looks great, but for me, it's all about that black shadow point coming out on the right-hand side. So this has been one of my best-selling images to date. A little bit more adventurous. This is Commerce City over the other side of Denver. And for me, it was all about the leading lines, getting absolute center. You know, there's lots of debate about rule of thirds, etc. I love to break that sometimes. And I think sometimes a very, very center-focused image can give you lots of drama. And I think railway lines are a great way of bringing this to life. It's probably bordering on being illegal, so I'm not recommending we all stand on railway tracks, but you know, to come away with a kind of unique shot like that was special as well. But again, for me, it's all about the exposure length. So this was about 4 to 5 seconds, I think, and the steam that you get moving across the top of the image is what kind of gives it that sense of drama, and of course the lights are popping. This is our favourite scene from Steamboat Springs. I imagine many of you, or most of you, will be very familiar with the Moore Barn. And I went with the intention of doing the cliche, if you like, and shooting Moore Barn. Could I recreate that famous 70s advert for Steamboat, you know, with the imaginary cowboys coming down the hill? And of course, I got to Moore Barn, and all I saw was a barn with about 7,000 footsteps in front of it. And I thought, there's just no way, there's no amount of spot cloning that could get rid of these footsteps. And I just turned to my right, and I just saw the most captivating, the beautiful scene. And again, this is about maybe looking the other way sometime. The obvious shot is off my shoulder to the left, and the beautiful shot was actually off to the right, without the cliche in it at all. This image ended up costing me $1,000. It was minus 20 Fahrenheit. And through long exposures, the snow was really, really deep. It was up to my waist. And putting the tripod in the snow over time, it just basically froze it. Carbon fiber tripod, and just shattered at the top. And I ended up having to tape the camera on to give me enough exposure length to achieve this image. This later raised $7,500 for colorectal cancer charity. So I think it has had a return on investment, if I could say. And again, talking about, you know, returning to the same scene for a different shot. Clearly, this is Maroon Bells, very iconic Colorado scene. The image on the left was my first trip to Maroon Bells. It was July. my wife and kids had temporarily abandoned me and gone to Europe, and I thought, wow, I can just explore. And I was so excited, went up to Aspen, and it just rained solid for 3 days. And this was the reward, basically. This mist that just descended upon the lake and around the bells and just gave me an atmosphere I couldn't have dreamt of as I was driving up there. So I was absolutely delighted with that shot. And of course, it was unbeknownst to me at that time, because it was the middle of July. This was after sunset. I was the only person in the whole area. I had my waders on, so I was able to get into the water and get down low. And I went back to catch the fall colours later that year and was just shocked at how many people were around there, and you're fighting for space. And I think I still got the shot that I call this twinkle bells. It's middle of the night. You can see the stars above the bells. And I was lucky enough to have the snow. But I've got to admit the evocation or evocativeness that I feel in story one is just leaps and bounds ahead of story two. The experience is something I can still remember and smell and be part of. And I don't get that lovely memory when I look at picture two, even though it's a lovely image. So I think the experience that we take away with us from an image is just so much part of how we as photographers appreciate our own images and the memories that go along with that. Then I had another, what you might call lucky break or breakthrough. I've already said that, I worked kind of in the Transamerica building. I was living 15 miles south of Denver. As you know, it's very rare that we get a kind of muggy, humid atmosphere. And I woke up and I looked out my bedroom window and I could just see this eeriness. And is there mist out here? This is very unusual. And I just pictured the scene of, could the mist be rising in Denver? And so I just drove like a bat out of hell, chucked the camera gear in the car, remembered my past to get up in the elevator in the office, and got to the top of the building just as this scene was just unfolding in front of me. And again, probably a pretty unique experience within Denver, and just, more a case of being in the right place at the right time. And I think when you have that kind of experience in front of you, I think you're more worried about not screwing it up than you are about catching it right, if that makes sense. You know you've got something perfect in front of you, and how can you do it justice becomes your motivation. So I hope I have, and that just this wonderful mist rising, the sunrise, and these sort of gloomy or looming clouds above it was a wonderful experience for me. That caught the imagination of some local media. So 303 Magazine did a profile of a number of photographers that had been lucky enough to capture the sunrise. They did a sort of special feature on my photos. And then Westward Magazine named me Best Denver Instagrammer of the Year. And I'm only kind of a year into living here. So as a photographer, it was just a great leap, if you like, in terms of being able to say, well, now I've been here a year, I'm maybe starting to get some of the presence that I was enjoying in the UK. So I was kind of pleased to accelerate that forward. And that introduced me to John Fielder and the Denver Photo Art Gallery, which I'm sure many of you remember was housed in Santa Fe in downtown Denver. And I had a wonderful year there, best-selling artist over the course of the year I was there. That's my daughter Alba, top right, who helped to sort of set up. And that was just a wonderful place to go, first Friday of the month, and just regale visitors with tales of how you brought your landscapes to life. Very much a landscape focus, as you can imagine, given it was John Fielder's gallery, and very much a Colorado focus within that, although I was able to showcase some of the images from Europe. So that was a kind of special time, and I really felt I'd made it, and I was really happy being in Denver. And then, of course, we just hit this stop sign, and I found symptoms. I had blood where you really don't want it, and visited the doctor, and they said, you need to go for a scan immediately, and discovered I had stage 4 colorectal cancer at the age of 48. And as you know, routine screening kicks in at 50. So I was feeling, far too young for this, and what do you do now? And, of course, life hasn't stopped, but you kind of feel photography is not up there at that point. I'm not thinking, what's my picture I'm going to take tomorrow? So my first priority was surgery. I had a foot removed from my colon. This is actually a picture of me about to have liver surgery, which came later because it had already metastasized. to my liver. When I was diagnosed, it made no promises at all. Your liver's probably inoperable, but we're going to do what we can in terms of managing the disease and the spread. And so you just deal with it as you can at that point. And my mind started to go through, well, how am I going to get through this journey? It's going to be really, really tough. Photography is, in many ways, my life. It's my creative outlet. It's what keeps me going and motivated. And that's when the oncologist said, listen, we've got this new wonder drug. It just came out last year. It's called panitumumab. The brand name there is Vectibix. But you need to avoid sunshine. And I was like, oh, okay. I've just moved to Colorado. It's 300 days of sunshine a year. That's not going to be easy. And he said, well, seriously, your face will just explode if you even touch sunshine. So that became a little bit of Colorado's beauty of 300 days of sunshine very quickly became a bit of a curse. But you learn to adapt. And I thought, well, being a landscaper, I might not be able to traverse cross country through bright sunshine and look for these sunrises. But I realized we've just got this wonderful abundance of nature and parks and accessible with a car on our doorstep. And suddenly my car became this mobile studio that would allow me to sort of travel around Colorado and travel around our park shooting wildlife, which, apart from the odd brush with the puffin that you saw earlier, was a completely new genre for me. I had been almost exclusively shooting landscape up until that point. So I set about shooting wildlife from my car. This, for the guys that live in Greenwood Village, this is Cherry Creek State Park. You've got wild animals kind of on our doorstep. And I now realize that coyotes, fairly commonplace, but this could be the African savannah. Just the scene was absolutely wonderful. And again, to be a tourist, relatively speaking, from the UK, this was like discovering a wolf. This was absolutely fantastic. And as someone that was going through a sort of deathly diagnosis, this was just a wonderful antidote and a way to get out and about and just enjoy nature in Colorado. This is an American kestrel, again, Cherry Creek State Park. And for me, this wasn't about the kestrel as much as the tree. And I actually discovered the tree first and just sat next to it and hoped and waited. And there was lots of magpies went by before this kestrel finally decided to settle. So then I knew I had the shot in the bag and was able to move on from the tree. This is a badger that some of you might remember from the Rocky Mountain Arsenal. Gosh, it's got to be 4 years ago now. And she was close enough to the road that you could sort of shoot her with a long lens. And she just worked so hard to feed those 4 ravenous cubs of hers. And I saw her bring back probably 4 prairie dogs like this in the space of an hour. And again, to be able to get that shot of wildlife in action was a great one in the bag. And then this burying owl, which I was convinced got to know me and like me. I would visit him every day as he's kind of guarded outside his burrow. But one day he wasn't there, and the next day he wasn't there. And that's when I realized that hawk that had been circulating over his burrow had probably found his way through. So I'm afraid there was kind of a sad ending, but there's kind of a circle of life aspect to that one. But it did give me ideas, and I was, at this point, I wasn't in a recovery position, but I was in an improving position. And every 3-month scan that went by, there was a reduction in my tumour. And it's normal at that point, I think, for cancer patients to think, well, how do I give back? How do I thank the people that are really helping me? And that's when I had this idea about producing a book. And I remember vividly the conversation I had with Kevin, who's on this call this evening. It's almost like, I've got this idea. I want to give back. I've got some photos. And he said, you've got to go for it, man. It's absolutely wonderful. And more than that, I'm going to help you. And I'm going to help you design the book. And it just brings you to tears, the way that your friends step in at moments like that and volunteer themselves to help you. I still get emotional thinking about it. And I'm kind of glad I can't see Kevin right now. But, there were also challenges as we went through this. And being a cancer patient, there's a couple of conditions. So I have neuropathy, which is a side effect of too much treatment, if you like. And it's basically this permanent pins and needles in my hands and feet, to the point that I almost couldn't feel the corner of my camera to release the shutter. So I just put a little paint spot on the shutter, and it acted like a braille dot, and it allowed me to get some sort of traction or roughness on that shutter so I could feel what I was doing. I also realized quite quickly that if you've got a badger running in front of your car and you're sitting in the driver's seat with 27 inches of camera lens in front of you, vaulting a gear stick can be quite painful. So once you're settled, you just move into the back and slide backwards and forwards. And I know all the nature photographers are going, well, that's really obvious. It's not obvious until you realize that you need it. So, of course, being a nature photographer, there's just so much downtime. And people, you ask me, you know, how can you, as a cancer patient, just sit and punish yourself by being yourself in the car like that? And I actually found it really a great place to sort of meditate and explore. And I would take down notes about my cancer journey and what was working and the people I wanted to thank. And that became the bones of my book, which was the combination of pictures and writing that went along with it. And I mentioned friends, and I really wanted to honour a few people. And you can see them in front of you. You mentioned Russ Burden, he's coming back to judge. Cliff's there and Kevin's there. And the contribution they made to my book was invaluable. Cliff shot me while I was on chemotherapy as a cover and inside shots. Kevin, as I say, designed the book, which you'll see in a moment. And Russ wrote this absolutely beautiful inscription for the front of the book. The words at the top are like the chapters and values of the book, if you like, the things that I thought got me through this journey. And the key really is optimism. There wasn't one negative sentiment in this whole book. It's intended to be an optimistic book of hope, if you like, for fellow cancer patients. But the fact that Russ was able to put that to paper and, you know, send that to me was wonderful. And I still can't read it out loud without getting emotional. And then it was down to, well, when do you launch? We kind of had the book ready, but I wasn't well. And I didn't want to launch a book that was about hope and recovery until I knew I had that flag in the sand of basically being in good shape. So 1 year, almost to the day after I was diagnosed and told I had stage 4 cancer, 10% chance of survival. I mean, that's a tough thing to hear. An inoperable liver, then they told me I was no evidence of disease. And you can imagine the kind of, just the elation between me and my wife as we sat in the oncologist's office and heard that news. Now, what you probably don't know is in Scotland, where I'm from, NED means non-educated delinquent. So when I actually posted my news on Facebook, there was a lot of laughing. And so finally you admitted you're a Ned. Yeah, bum. So I was getting all these kind of humorous comments from my sarcastic Scottish friends. Around about this time as well, I was asked to go, I'd worked all the way through chemotherapy, and I was asked to fly to Denmark for a business trip. And Denmark's not that far from Scotland. So I managed to get a short flight back home and visited my father, who you can see in the picture with me. So it's not the best photo in here, but it's the happiest photo for me to see me and my dad cheering my no evidence of disease. What you don't know is that he had lost his first son at 2 to cancer. He had lost his wife at 59 to the same cancer that was killing his second son. So for him, this was like third time lucky as a family that we'd actually kind of broken through into survival. So this was a big emotional time for me and my family, as you can imagine. So we launched the book, and I had not mentioned my illness to any of my social media over the whole period of my treatment. So Facebook, Flickr, whatever, there's probably 20,000 followers on there. And you can see the questions about how's this guy gone from landscape to wildlife? What's going on there? But no one knew that I had cancer apart from close friends and family. So when I launched, they basically said, I have cancer and I'm better, and here's the book. There was an amazing response, and the media was absolutely fantastic. So lots of coverage through Denver media, there was TV interviews, etc. And through the course of 18 months, I think the book raised about $45,000. And all of that, every single cent, went to the Colorectal Cancer Alliance to help benefit research and awareness for that disease. At the end of that year, though, I was given a wonderful accolade when a picture from the book, which is this hummingbird you see on the left, was featured as the lead image on the front of Colorado Outdoors. And for me, this was almost I've beaten cancer, but I've returned as a photographer, because this image cover had nothing to do with cancer whatsoever. This was just recognition of a good wildlife image. And to move from landscape through cancer into wildlife, and a year later get that kind of accolade was just wonderfully heartwarming for me after a very, very difficult journey. And it really got me thinking again about how do I now use my talent, if you like, for good, you know, and I do believe that everyone in a camera club has a special talent, you know, in terms of being a photographer, and there's some good use that we can put it to. It doesn't need to be grand money-making schemes. It could be helping out a neighbour, a friend with a portrait, whatever, but we can find a way to use our talents and lead to better. I've clearly committed mine to a cause that's very close to my heart because of my illness, and these are all images of things that I'm involved in the colorectal cancer front. The Fight Colorectal Cancer logo at the start, I'm now Vice President of Fight Colorectal Cancer. So I've not only turned this from a hobby into an advocacy project, it is now my main career in many ways. Back home in Colorado, I was determined that people who were under 50 being diagnosed with this disease, that should not happen in the future. There is a rise in colorectal cancer diagnoses in people in their 40s, for example. So I think the screening age needs to come. So we've got a bill going through Colorado State Capitol at the moment. It's on pause, hold, because of COVID. All of the business there is on hold. So that's been a little bit of an anticlimax this year, and we might have to go back and try again next year. But we were basically 2/3 of the way there. We're already through the House. We were halfway through the Senate committees, and the governor had already indicated a willingness to sign. So we were in kind of touching distance, and then COVID kicked in. But you can watch out for that bill coming to Colorado in the near future. Now I'm at 2 3/4 years NED. And as a cancer patient, those little 3/4 and halves and quarters are all very, very important. So I count every single 3 months. I still have scans every 3 months to check that things are in good shape. So I just had one in March. And so that was the kind of latest news. So I'll be 3 years in August, all going well, and hope to sort of keep that progress up. The survival rate to 5 years is still only 14%, but because I've had NED and since a liver resection, which sort of removed much of any sort of remaining sort of molecules, if you like, the chances of me achieving the 5 years do rocket. So I'm feeling fairly positive about that. And of course, I'm back out on the road as a photographer. I returned to my dramatic flowerscapes. These are not far from Denver. This is out near Denver Airport. In fact, shot with my good friend Rand, who's on this presentation this evening. So on the left is all about the drama and the sky in the foreground. Again, that's flash and grad filter that's bringing that to life. On the right, it's just a stroke of luck. You know, this Sphinx moth arrives on the hummingbird. This is actually a wide angle lens, so I'm right up there against it and just managed to capture that. It's a massive image file, so it's quite heavily cropped. But to get that clarity on the moth, but the key there was having the flash, because that was dusk and I just wouldn't have got it otherwise. So always have those spare bits of kit in your bag. Again, traveling. So on the left is the sand dunes. That's a kind of dust shot. And on the right is a stunning view or stunning memory for me, certainly, from the highest point of the peaks. And as a guy that's just come through stage 4 cancer, I'm still in treatment. I still get chemotherapy every 2 weeks. To basically trudge up there with all your gear, just wheezing. And there's so many moments I could have just stopped and given up. I had a friend that was just pulling me on and saying, you've got to get there. And to get to the top and be greeted by this view was just a wonderful sense of achievement. And so even if it's not a great photo, it's a great memory for me to have done that. Travel down to White Sands in New Mexico, again, actually inspired by the Great Sand Dunes, to sort of look for other similar features, and drove down to the White Sands. And this managed to get the Share the View first prize in the landscape section 2 years ago. So that was, again, a nice return to landscape photography. I also returned to northern Spain. This is a kind of eerie, misty scene in a forest there. The reason this is evocative for me is this exact scene with this exact tree was when I think I knew I had cancer. So to be able to go back a year and a half later, cancer-free, and shoot the scene properly without that anxiety was, again, just a wonderful experience of recovery for me. Then traveling further afield, I was in the midst of treatment and recovery while I was 50. So I never really got a big 50th birthday present. And my wife said, you've got to treat yourself. You've got to get that trip to Africa. So as a family, we kind of saved up and let me go on this wonderful safari last year to Zambia. If you get the chance to go, it's absolutely thrilling. and on top of that, got the iconic leopard kill shot, which just, you know, made me feel special. My favourite shot actually is the shot of the dead animal, bottom right, and again, just that scene of the perfect mirrored image of the African buffalo skull in the water. What was the image of the trip for me. However, that skull was nowhere near that water when I found it. So it's again visualizing the scene. And I had to get permission from our guide to basically take it down to the water. He's like, wait, hold on. And he got a big rock and he chucked it in the water. And he said, okay, there's no crocodiles, off you go. And it's just a reminder that you really are on the verge of death with every kind of movement in Africa. And then traveling further afield as well. So trip top left was with another friend, Jeff Johnson, who you mentioned could be judging in a couple of months. Hopefully his health recovers very, very quickly. He's got dear friends thinking about him at the moment. This is a trip I went with Jeff to Alaska to try and catch the Northern Lights. This was actually the only night they appeared. You know, I'd call it kind of 20% success, but the message here is about dealing with the side effects. If you remember, I have neuropathy. Neuropathy is absolutely excruciating and cold. How do you overcome that barrier? And my biggest fear traveling to Alaska was that my feet and hands simply wouldn't cope. So
big guy?
Sorry? No, okay. So I set about finding the most hard-wearing, cold-resistant boots I could find. It was North Face chill cats, which are rated down to minus 40 degrees. And ironically, I ended up being the last man standing on this trip. And all these people are sitting in the truck, absolutely frozen. I'm still romping about in these boots despite neuropathy. So there's a famous Scottish comedian that says there's no such thing as bad weather, just bad clothing. So you've just got to find the right solution. And that's my solution bottom left as well. Is now I don't avoid sunshine, I just dress appropriately. So actually it's now a familiar scene through COVID, but I will have just a face mask and a hood and just make sure that I'm always out of the sunshine. So that allows me to continue to shoot. Middle picture there is a member of my son's track team. So it was just, you know, again, bright sunlight, but I wasn't letting that stop me. And an example there in Zambia, where you're in absolutely blistering, the brightest sunlight possible, yet I was able to shoot freely because I was completely covered. I should have mentioned the drug that created the sun sensitivity is the drug that I'm still on every 2 weeks. So again, that's why my face is red now. It's because of that drug. Then I discovered Sandwash Basin. I don't know how many of you have been up to Northwest Colorado, but if you get a chance to visit, there's about, I think it's 80,000 acres. It's an absolutely massive expanse. I mean, it's as big as a small state. And there's something like 500 or 600 wild Mustangs living in this beautiful kind of isolated corner of Northwest Colorado. And I visited, fun enough, 2 years ago, this week, was my first visit. And I had a fairly kind of disappointing first day, and I was traveling home around about 11 o'clock the following morning and happened upon this beautiful Pinto Mustang that you see in front of you here. And he's in the middle of a battle. So that's why he's kind of jumping. He's kind of about to lunge another Mustang. I had no idea this is the most famous Mustang in the world, basically. And I captured him almost by accident. So this has become a really iconic shot. It's the one on the wall behind me here, but it's also been the subject of Denver news features. And there's almost a fanatical following for this horse. So it's been another breakthrough, if you like, for me into what you might call horse photography on that front. I kept going back. This was the same week 2 years ago, and this amazing wild fight scene. I loved my trip to Zambia, but I never saw anything approaching the energy and the raw drama that you actually see amongst those Mustangs when the testosterone really, really starts to fly. So this achieved the Colorado Life Editors Award at the Share the View competition 2 years ago. So that was a nice accolade. And then I was in an exhibition just this March at the National Western Complex. It's the Rocky Mountain Horse Expo. And that image in the top there took Best in Show. So again, I managed to sort of break into another genre there, if you like. I love the drama of the image top right, but again, it's beauty's in the eye of the beholder. My wife said there is no way on earth that image is going on our wall at home, but we have the image that's bottom left of that sort of perfectly symmetrical, almost chess-like bookend scene is hanging on our wall in a public space. So again, knowing your audience is kind of helpful there too. The image bottom right is two absolutely frozen wild horses. Again, I think it was minus 25 at this point. Just the bristle and frozen whiskers just absolutely make this shot. So I'm very proud of that one as well. In terms of exhibitions, this year I mentioned already the Denver airport exhibition. There was an invitation to produce images for the Colorado Photographic Arts Center. And it was about bringing you kind of yourself, your values, your pain, your struggle to life. And as a cancer patient, I felt this was a story I still hadn't really told about myself visually. I had told it through my other pictures, but self-portraiture wasn't really my thing. And I had a particularly tough month where I'd lost a very good friend in her 20s to colorectal cancer. And I met a boy of 17 who'd been diagnosed stage 4 and had already spread to his liver and to his lungs. So I've got to be honest, I was feeling kind of angry. And the idea was to bring that anger and determination through in this picture. I was a little bit, my scar, although it's long, wasn't prominent enough. So I got my daughter to write the word survivor around it just to give it that extra punch, if you like. And the amount of people that have since said, you've got to get that tattooed on your stomach. So you never know, I might surprise my wife one year with a survivor tattoo in my stomach. The images on the right featured in an exhibition at the Robert Anderson Gallery, which was over in Colfax, East Colfax, Denver. Sadly, Robert, he's got, well, not sadly, happily for him, he's gone to travel the world a little bit, but he's shut down his gallery. But a little bit like the John Fielder experience, that was a wonderful place to expose work. And Robert was one of the few, what I'd call great photography benefactors in Denver. There just aren't enough galleries, I feel, for photographic art. So myself and again, Rand, who's on the call this evening, have both enjoyed some of Robert's generosity of giving us space. The scene on the left is a favourite from Paris. And again, talking about iconic scenes. This was October 2018. I was in Paris on business. My boss said, what are you going to do tonight? And I said, I'm going to get a unique shot of the Eiffel Tower. And of course, he just laughed and said, no chance. And I went out that evening and didn't know what I was going to shoot. I was just searching and basically found this area in front of the Eiffel Tower, which you see here, which is normally submerged in water. This is actually a big pond or lake, and it would be full of fish. And that green block that you see usually illuminates the water from below. So the fact that this was exposed was a unique moment, a unique scene. Rand, who's on the call, I think was back in Paris probably, I don't know, 6 months later, say, and said, it was covered with water. So who knows? Maybe this is one of those once-in-a-decade experiences where they've drained the pool and been cleaning it or something. But again, I think I've managed to get a unique shot there. Similarly, the Prague scene there, there's millions of pictures of Prague Bridge, but again, trying to get a different view with the light kind of almost centered, which again, breaking the rules, but trying to give something a bit more interesting there. Chat. Oh, so I was just checking it wasn't hurrying me along. So, sorry, got lost there. Yeah, so this year, I've been asked to tell my story, and basically it'd be an update on the story you've heard this evening at the PSA Photo Festival, which is going to be held in Colorado Springs. So if you're in and you're around for that event, I think it's going to be pretty cool to have this national event here in Colorado, and I'm very privileged to have been asked to speak at that. Honestly, you guys have heard the story, but it would be love to see a few familiar faces there again later in the fall. And I'm about to close, but I wanted to leave you with a little bit of a message. I remember back at that Nottingham Outlaws club that I mentioned at the start, This guy here, Will Chung, who was the editor of the magazine that featured my seascapes, he came along and gave the club a lecture and a talk, a bit like I'm doing this evening. And at the end, he kind of looked out at the audience and he was kind of wagging his finger. And all you landscapers and sports photographers, he says, you're all brilliant. You're all absolutely wonderful. He says, but you don't spend enough time shooting your family. And he kind of gave us this health warning that, you know, when you get later in life, you're going to be looking at the albums and if all you can see is the landscapes and seascapes, you're going to be sad. So I've kind of carried that around with me all the time and been absolutely committed to following my kids and sort of tracking their sports careers, if you like. Again, it's just a wonderful way for us to use our skills on the family. And I'm sure that many, many of us do. I'm not teaching anyone anything here, but this is my daughter Alba on the left in the middle of our swimming event, my son Andrew, who had the most anticlimactical graduation of his life, as you can imagine today. Basically, the last day of high school.
Now, I'm not sure if it will end it.
Not a soul knows about it, but there you go. So that really is the conclusion. I think the point was, I love all my photos, I love photography, but at the end of the day, it's the family ones that kind of keep you going, keep the heart pumping. So that is my personal journey towards photo advocacy. I'm not trying to sell anything here. They're just my web links and Facebook and Instagram if anyone wants to follow or hook up. I'm always happy to make new friends that way. So Dave, I'm going to stop there. I don't know if you want to invite questions or how you want to facilitate the next bit, but that is it for me, basically.
Scott, first of all, thank you so much for your wonderful presentation. It's very, very inspirational. I thought it was great that you ended this with talking about how important it was to take photographs of your family, you know, instead of maroon bells or the horses, whatever, which were wonderful. But you know, that was sage advice, and I just wish you so much good success, you know, keeping Ned. And you know, I know it's a battle, you know, and I respect you. And then also the work that you're doing on behalf of other people to get these bills passed through the legislature here in Colorado. It's critical, and hopefully this gains traction nationally. So thank you for what you do, man.
Thank you, Dave. I'm happy to take any questions or comments if anyone wants to say anything.
Don't everybody speak at once.
Scott, I'll jump in there. This is Kevin. How are you, buddy?
I'm doing good.
When I first joined the Zoom meeting here tonight, and Dave and I were chatting before you popped in, we were just chatting about the Through the Window book, and I said I was reminiscing back on it, and I said that you and I were both pretty bummed when that kind of came to an end when we were building that book, because we got to talk so much, and it was just such involvement for me, and such an honor to be a part of that journey of yours, you know, to put that book together. And it was it sucked, you know, when it kind of came to an end, but I'm so thrilled to see where it has gone and where it has led for you, and opened up so many avenues, not only for you but for everyone else. And I just wanted to say thanks. I'm just happy to have been a part of that and to know you as a friend. And when you were talking about that, I'm glad that no one could see me, really, because I was kind of to tears a little bit there.
Well, may God continue to bless you with your work and with your health.
Thank you, Peggy. It's very kind of you.
So this is Cliff. When are you going to come back to focus?
I think I should come back very soon. I'm kind of settled in my new house now. I've got a lot of energy. I think when the COVID thing lifts, then I'm kind of ready to get stuck in. So.
Well, there's, you know, with the Zoom now, there's really no excuse.
Yes, I'm feeling hijacked now, Cliff. But
you are. That's right.
Scott, I do have a question actually about some of that New York stuff you were shooting at night. Were you ever you were working by yourself primarily, weren't you, at those times?
Yeah, always.
Yeah.
I only felt threatened by the rats. I never felt threatened by people.
Okay.
I mean, literally those scenes on that little beach, there are rats everywhere.
Oh,
Yuck.
That's what we go through to produce beauty, isn't it?
Right.
All those little groins had rats kind of crawling over them.
Oh my God.
So I feel like I've put a few people off now. Apologies. I think it's just suffering for our art, isn't it? So.
It is.
Well, as someone who's been out shooting with you, you're very inspiring, and your work ethic is amazing. We have nicknamed the hour before dawn the Scott Wilson hour because we normally don't wake up that early, but when you're out with Scott, you definitely are up early and out late.
Rand and I went to the sand dunes together. I think we slept about an hour and a half.
And we walked many miles.
Yeah. The dunes are a severe test on anyone that's not fit and in their 50s. Moreover.
God, it's one of these pregnant pauses, so I'm not sure where we go from here.
No, we don't need to force it. But seriously, if anyone's got a question about any of the images or the places that I go or things, and I'm happy to answer.
Actually, Scott, I do have a question on when you're using the flash with the flowers, were you using any kind of modifier with it?
No, and honestly, I would call myself a real amateur flash user. So it's, although everything in the camera is manual, the flash will be as automatic as it possibly can be. So it's just up there. And for me, it's all about where I position it. So I make sure I've got a diffuser on it because too much flash will take over. But there's no modification. It's just the flash doing its thing, and I'm working the rest of the kit, if you like.
Yeah. Okay.
Scott, when I look at your work, from your landscape work to your wildlife work, it's clear to me that your processing approach has changed quite a bit. Could you talk to us a little bit about that?
So, yeah, I think, I did a bit of an analysis recently. I've got about probably 10,000 pictures on Flickr. And if you look at the first 3,000, they're all under-processed. There's kind of nothing there at all. And then I went into overdrive, and the next 3,000 are over-processed. And then I hope I've found balance in the last kind of third of my career, if you like. Even within that, there's definitely a difference, as you observe, between landscape and wildlife. And if I'm honest, through wildlife and sports, I'm trying to replicate the scene as accurately and as realistically as it is there. I think once you've got the shot in the bag in wildlife or sports, then you can afford to explore. But when you approach those things, a bit more like a news journalist, where you just think, there's a fight going on. If I miss the fight, I've missed the moment. So you don't have a lot of time for art. If you've got a horse plodding along in the mist, then you can start to play with a slower exposure. You can start to produce a more artistic version. Landscape, on the other hand, is something I do believe is art from the start. And you know, I kind of view my landscape work as something that is almost demanding of processing. I think the key there is not to over-process. And honestly, if I was to call out a difference between the US and the UK is probably, generally speaking, on low processing, and a lot of US work is heavily saturated and high, and I'm trying to strike a balance in the middle there. And certainly I learned a lot by being in John Fielder's gallery about where I wanted to position myself, and it wasn't a more natural, you know, processed enough but not too much kind of place, and it's so difficult to strike that balance, but I think it starts to become more and more instinctive as you get into it.
Yeah, but generally, if you notice the processing, it's too much.
Yeah. But you, yeah. I think even that has a lot of judgment loaded into it, because I mean, I'd say there's a lot of processing in your work, but it's absolutely beautiful.
I'm sorry, what you got stepped on there? What did you say?
I'd say that there's a fair degree of processing in your portraiture work of the veterans, but it's absolutely beautiful. So I wouldn't always say that processing equals pejorative.
No, but if the processing takes over the image, then it's too much.
Yep, I agree with that.
Scott, growing up, did you do any other artwork? This is Gwen.
I remember you, Gwen, of course.
Yeah, it's good to hear your voice. Did you, when you were growing up, did you draw, paint?
So funnily enough, I had the most amazing experience this week. So when I befriended a woman in Canada who is an art critic, and for some reason she's taken a shine to my work, which is lovely. And she just writes poetry. I mean, she'll feature different photographers and literally writes poetry about their work, and she chose some of mine. So we got chatting, and she's very probing, like you were, like, what inspired you? Were you an artist as a child? I said, well, funnily enough, when I was sort of 17, my first thought was to go to art school and develop as a painter. And so she started almost mourning the artist that had been lost within. And I said, but no, I've got my canvas now. You know, I'm very happy with photography. But last week, an envelope arrived from Quebec. And it was, in this envelope was a blank artist pad and 4 pencils and an eraser and a pencil sharpener from this woman in Quebec saying, for the artist within. And it was just absolutely beautiful that someone I have never met in my life took that kind of interest. It's the most heartwarming thing I've had for ages. It was wonderful.
That's great.
Very cool.
So I now owe her a drawing. And fun enough, her advice was, because she gets photography and she gets art, she says, I want you to take one of your photos and just turn it upside down and then draw it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm going to do it. I'm going to send it to her.
That's great.
Scott, this is Dave again. Could you talk a little bit more about your experiences in Sandwash with the Mustangs? Are you starting to see more and more people there, or how's that affecting the horses? I know it's a very rugged area, so maybe that keeps people at bay. It's, you know, hard on tires for one.
It's so expansive that you're rarely kind of feeling that you're on top of anybody. I mean, literally, you can have miles between you and the next person. I think at busy times of the year and in the middle of the day and on weekends, it's a little bit busier at the front entrance. And what you seem to find is that the horses that are a little bit more habituated tend to hang around at the front entrance and they're not spooked. If you want to get the real drama and action and rare horses and rugged, you've got to go quite deep. And you're talking about driving sometimes 80 miles, you know, inside this track. And literally there could be nobody. I've been there by myself for 3 days and not seen a soul. So that brings danger as well. It's actually it's a very rugged, I mean, I can't even call it a road. It's just a dirt track. And there's flint and stuff in the track, and the amount of burst tires is astonishing. And there was one night, I mean, I can change a tire, it's not a problem. But I'd gone up in a Volvo, which you think is the safest car in the world, and it's a hybrid, and it didn't have a spare tire. So I got this burst tire. It was 7:30 in the evening. I phoned the local tire repair guy who's 30 miles away, and he said, I will see you in 14 hours. This is 7:30 in the evening, and it's the middle of winter, and it was minus something. And luckily I had all this gear in the back of the car, and I was able to spend the night there quite comfortably, and basically turned it into an opportunity and shot some beautiful Milky Way scenes. You know, I usually go there for wildlife, and suddenly I was coming in with Milky Way scenes. And I guess the lesson is you've got to go prepared. So you've got to have a decent vehicle. It's got to be 4x4 capable. It's got to have high clearance. You've got to have enough fuel. You've got to have water if you're going to get stranded. You've got to remember there are no toilets, so be prepared. And just take gear in case you get stranded there overnight, because you are alone. And I have heard a story, just one story, about someone dying who got stranded, and it was so cold and they were trying to walk out and they just didn't make it. So it's a very fun place, but it's not a playground.
Well, your images of they're just gorgeous. So, but it's nice to know kind of behind the scenes what can happen.
Yeah. And again, it's about moments. I mean, you can go hours and hours and hours and not see a horse, and then you suddenly got a fight that might last 3 seconds. So you've got to be ready and alert and on your guard. And it's not, oh, this isn't shooting from the car window. This is getting out and walking. And I think the reason I've got good shots is I'm willing to walk a long way to get them. So as stupid as this sound, don't lose your car, because you have nothing to navigate. So you've got to be very, very aware of how you're going to get back to your vehicle.
That's as bad as being downtown sometimes.
I've got, can you hear me, Scott?
Yes, Larry.
Yeah, please don't take lack of comments from everybody as lack of empathy for what you've been going through. I know I personally am blown away by everything you've been through and your presentation. Just incredible. Thank you very much.
No, thanks for those words. And I'm very familiar with Zoom. I also used to run corporate affairs for a big brewery in Europe, and there was 13 countries used to dial into a call that I had to host every week, and getting a word out of any of them was impossible. So I know what it's like when there's this awkwardness of telecommunications and trying to, I think Zoom is helping to break through some of that, but I don't worry about no comments. I just know it's a difficult space to talk.
Thank you.
Have you got more club proceedings, Dave? Have you any competitions tonight or anything like that?
I think this is the end of the path, but I've been looking forward to this for a long time. So thank you very much, Scott.
No, thanks for inviting me. I really enjoyed it. It's been genuinely lovely, and it's been different for me. I've told this story many times, you can imagine, but to actually retell it to people that were involved has kind of been quite emotional for me. So Cliff, Kevin, just having you there is, because I talk about you to other people, and to actually talk about you while you're there was kind of different and special.
Well, it was an honor to be part of the project, I can assure you.
Thank you, Cliff.
Absolutely.
Take care.
I will.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. My
Thanks,
pleasure.
Scott.
Okay, Scott, we're going to see you at future focus meetings, either in person or on Zoom, one or the other.
Absolutely. I'm just
Okay.
going to read these comments. So are you all staying on to chat, or are you all leaving, or what happens?
It's past our bedtime.
So everyone's leaving. Okay. I'm just going to screen grab the chat and then I'll read it later. Super. Right, I'm going to head off. Thank you, everybody.
Take care.
Good night, Scott.
Bye.
Cheers.
See you,
Bye,
Scott.
everybody.
Stay in touch, buddy. Love you, man.